Ecclesiastes is a book that will tell us what life is in light of Genesis chapter 3. So if you recall, last week we talked about the consequences of human rebellion against God in Genesis chapter 3. We read there that mankind has rejected God and his goodness in pursuit of man's own wisdom. Right? So what is going on in the garden in Genesis chapter 3? It's the story of the first humans, and it's also the story of all of humanity, and it's the story of every human. And it's this story. God says, I love you and trust me. And then humans say, I don't trust you. And I'm going to do things how I want to do them, not how you want to do them. I'm going to value things how I value them and not how you value them. I'm going to see things how I see them and not how you see them. That's what humans do. And then Ecclesiastes says, now, with your vision lowered from God, what is life like? What can you make of it? So man has rejected God and his goodness, and mankind has been cut off from the life of God. He is estranged from God. He's kicked out of the garden, out of God's presence. And so he's disconnected from the very source of life itself, and he is destined to die. Mankind has given the dominion over the earth that he was supposed to have. He's given that to the serpent in Genesis 3. And so the ground is cursed. And the work of mankind is anxious toil, not fulfilling vocation. And all of this is summed up as mankind has chosen to worship creation rather than the Creator. This is precisely how Paul puts this, the problem of humanity, in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. Paul says, for although they, who? Humanity, knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, and so they became futile in their thinking, futile, empty, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise or seeking wisdom, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. And so human beings have chosen to worship what is created rather than the Creator. And people today think, well, that's not true. I don't worship like statues of snakes or whatever else. And that might be true. But you worship yourself, you the created being. And while we're at it there, when we speak of worship here, we're not talking about songs. We're talking about worship is the orientation of your life. So what is it that you have seen fit to build your life around? And you might think, Christian, oh, God, I've chosen to build my life around God. And that may be true, but is it really true? How actually have you built your life? Where do you spend most of your resources? What do you lay awake worrying about? What, if I could read the transcript of your prayers, what are you actually longing for and asking God for? Do you orient your life around God, or do you orient your life around something else and ask God to bless that? And the effect of our rejection of God is that man's vision is now darkened, or more particularly, because mankind worships what is created, that is, orients his life around what is created, his vision is bounded in by the earthly, by the temporal, the finite, the material. Right? So after Genesis 3, mankind does not live his life connected to God and with his eyes on God. Rather, he lives his life disconnected from God and with his eyes on what we find in Ecclesiastes. Here's the phrase, his eyes on what is under the sun. And so you have Ecclesiastes, and you have this term, the preacher or the teacher. And traditionally, this is my view here, it's Solomon writing this book and probably toward the end of his life. And he's reflecting on life, and he's reflecting on everything that he has accomplished, everything that he's sought, everything that he's experienced, everything that he has attained. And his conclusion, and this is the downer, his conclusion is, who cares? Who cares? The teacher in Ecclesiastes, what he does is he is going to relentlessly examine life under the sun. That is, with a secularistic perspective, a perspective that is centered on what is of earth. And the teacher, as he does this, he will give a gigantic dose of reality. And the reason that we're so uncomfortable with that is because reality is something that humans avoid as much as possible. The people that we have the hardest time telling the truth to is ourselves. It's not other people that we most lie to. It's ourselves. We choose to do everything we can to live in a fantasy that we wish existed rather than the world that actually exists. And we do this because we have this lurking suspicion that if we look at life as it really is, we are not going to like what we see. One writer of the 20th century put it like this, though. It's not so easy to avoid reality. Reality is that which, when you stop believing it, doesn't go away. Or Ayn Rand said, you can avoid reality, but you cannot avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. And so Solomon is going to force us to look reality in light of Genesis 3 square in the eye. And it's a downer. Because the problem of reality, says Solomon, he opens this. It's the thesis of the whole book. And this is the Word of God. He says, life under the sun is the Hebrew term hevel. And the English Standard Version translates it as vanity. So you see Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 2. This is the whole book right here. Vanity of vanities. Hevel havelim, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity.